I woke up this morning and I thought, hey, you know what would be a good video? Talking about masturbation scenes in cinema. And no, I'm not being edgy with this one, I'm being sincere, 100%. For as funny and silly as this may be, I am being genuine, or at least trying to be. There are a lot of valid filmmaking things to talk about here. I wanted to discuss how masturbation is depicted in film and thus by extension what these depictions say about how we view the act culturally, what its representation in film says about our overall culture. And this is also just a video to talk about how it's used in cinema to convey certain points or accentuate certain character traits, similar to what I talked about with swear words in the swear words video essay I did. How it's incorporated into film to evoke certain emotions. Am I an oddball? Am I a freak for wanting to talk about this? Yes.
No, it was me, Franco. I fucking made jizz in your magazine.
What?
To tell you the truth though, to lay all the cards out on the table, when I see masturbation depicted in film, it really fascinates me. Depending on the context of how it's done, of course. When done well, it does quite an effective job at adding a strange sort of depth to a character. It's such an intimate and private act that when you see a movie character doing it, it brings you closer to that person. It's a fairly universal and primitive ritual that instantly humanizes someone. So again, when I see one of these scenes, it can usually be quite effective in making me feel a stronger bond and connection with the character. They appear more human for it, more raw, more vulnerable. Then of course this allows me to go, hey, that's just like me. Like, that's me sitting there. I do that.
I'm pathetic. I'm fat and pathetic.
If we start with one of my favourite scenes of masturbation in film, and the whole reason I made this video was so that I could say that sentence, that being this scene with Nicolas Cage in Adaptation, we can observe some of that aforementioned vulnerability when he does the deed. Vulnerability as well as immense loneliness, the scene reads as quite pathetic. Not utterly scathing as it's still being sympathetic to this character's perspective, but there is still an inherent sadness to it. It's a film about a rather reclusive introvert who suffers from social anxiety and struggles to make connections with those of the opposite sex. Instead of overcoming his nervousness and successfully romancing the various women that he finds attractive throughout the film, he resorts to masturbation, in particular masturbation to the fantasy of these real-life women that he briefly interacts with. It's rather undignified and again quite sad and depressing. He's failed to face up to adversity and regressed further into himself whilst opting for a quick fix solution. A solution that is more or less substanceless and, at least on a mental level, rather unhealthy.
I like looking at you.
I like looking at you too, Charlie.
These scenes perfectly accentuate this aspect of the character. Without their inclusion in the movie, I'm sure we'd still have a deeply three-dimensional character, but still they add a certain amount of rawness. Again, an intimacy as a rather revealing aspect of his humanity has been shared with us. And it is also quite funny for just how much of a loser he is.
I'm going up to Santa Barbara this Saturday for an orchid show, and I
Oh,
I'm sorry.
well,
This film came out in 2002, and I think it was rather ahead of its time for its sensitive depiction of male loneliness. We aren't necessarily supposed to watch this and just go, oh, what a fucking loser. I mean, you can if you want, but I think we're also supposed to identify with it. There are parts of ourselves that we can see in him here, some of our rawest and most compromising parts, both for men and for women. If we now take a look at some examples that completely contrast the examples from Adaptation, those being the rather famous scenes from the American Pie films, boy do we see a different story.
Hey, Jimmy. Just wanted to say sweet dreams.
Yeah, sweet dreams. Good night, Mom.
So these are arguably some of the most well-known masturbation scenes in all of cinema. Their storytelling function is simple. They are provocative, raunchy comedic gags that are designed to elicit emotions of shock, disgust, and amusement in the viewer. The cinematic language is pretty straightforward here. It's, boy, isn't masturbation funny? Isn't it awkward when your parents catch you? Oh, it's so gross and weird and ooh.
This is just a bad reception, honey.
Respect my hairy ass.
What's that?
In its defense, it is a relatable and timeless coming-of-age concept that reflects an experience that every teenage boy will be able to identify with. You don't watch the American Pie films for an intellectual and mature study of sexuality. It's just whimsical fun that's aimed at young adults. And that is a valid approach because masturbation is funny and awkward and strange and a little bit uncomfortable of a topic for teenagers, so to poke fun at it is appropriate. It's just a bit of fun. Aside from the drastic disparity in tone, another key detail that sets this apart from the scene in Adaptation is the difference in age. The character performing the act here is a teenage boy as opposed to a middle-aged balding man. When it's a teenage boy doing it, the tone is light, playful and goofy, but when it's a middle-aged man doing it, it's a lot more depressing. It's depicted through this colourless and dreary lens. At no point does American Pie convey its character as majorly depraved for indulging in the act, and it's usually the same case in a lot of other instances of film when it's a teenager. It's a relatively casual and ordinary thing to see a teenage boy perform this ritual, but when it's a man well into his 30s or 40s, it fills us with disquiet and partial revulsion. It's not an activity that you're expected to indulge in when you start to become an adult, it's for the young who are sexually discovering themselves. But as time moves forward, you are supposed to enter into the next stage, which is having sex with another person. Your ability to court romantic partners becomes more and more crucial, and having to resort to masturbation for sexual gratification is just not the way things are supposed to go. At least this is the notion that society puts forward, and I'm not necessarily going to argue against that because I understand the logic behind it. Because masturbation is not a long-term solution, it's this crude crutch that you use in your early teens, maybe young adult life. Excessive masturbation in your 20s can be an indicator that you may suffer from social anxiety. A sort of counter-argument to this notion was put forth in the Seinfeld episode The Contest, which displayed the act as a casual thing for single adults to do on a weekly basis.
You don't think I can?
No chance!
You think you could?
Well, I know I could hold out longer than you.
In fact, the joke of the episode is that they aren't doing it, and that's seen as the unusual thing. It's almost promoting the idea that if you aren't having frequent sex in your adult life, then masturbation is only a healthy solution for the meantime.
We have to do it. It's part of our lifestyle. It's like shaving.
Seinfeld was rather ahead of its time with this episode because finally there was this laid back and down to earth light being cast upon masturbation with regards to the role it played in the average person's life. Everyone does it, everyone needs to do it from time to time, it's just part of life. And this sentiment is equally attributed to both genders with the casual inclusion of Elaine in the episode. The showrunners were all the more braver for this because female masturbation was even more of a taboo.
All right, you're in for 150.
Okay, 150.
All right, now.
Modern depictions of masturbation in adult females have come a long way since the 90s, however. Here in The Shape of Water, similar to Adaptation, it's still an expression of the main character's loneliness, but it's more so done through the lens of this fairy tale yearning for a sexual partner, a hopeful, quirky tone almost. She's doing this in the absence of a lover, but the scene isn't making her out to be depraved or pathetic. It's a lot more forgiving of her than the scene in Adaptation is with Nicolas Cage. This scene is playful and humorous, and it showcases this act as a very reasonable thing for someone in this position to be doing. These movies' tones are very different, but I can't help but notice a difference in how masturbation is portrayed between the two genders. Masturbation, and by extension sexuality, usually behave as sources of empowerment for women in film. It's seen as a positive occurrence, something to be celebrated or even encouraged. Poor Things is a perfect recent example of this. This absurdist comedy all about this childlike adult female going on this odyssey of sexual discovery, in the process engaging in an obscene amount of sexual acts. The sex in this film is always either light-hearted, humorous, or empowering. It's never depicted as something that could be negative, it's only ever positive. Whereas if the main character were male, we might have a different story on our hands. It's tempting to see this as a double standard, but I think the real reason behind this may be a bit more complex. Within recent history, sexuality in women has been something that has been quite avidly repressed. It's only been within the last couple of decades where we've seen this pushback on these tight societal presuppositions on what women are allowed to do, or what we condone for women to do. It's due to this tight repression that we're now witnessing an explosion of unabashed depictions of female sexuality. A lot of modern art and media has felt the need to depict female sexuality as this beautiful, wholesome thing, because for the last 100+ years, women have been made to feel ashamed of their sexuality. For a lengthy period, it was the avant-garde thing to do. Prior to this, only one side of the coin was being emphasised, which was the negative side. Oh, this will lead to teen pregnancy or STDs and whatnot. It's quite the contrary case for male sexuality, however, which under artistic circumstances is usually depicted as this lustful carnal craving, this depraved, devouring and destructive force. Again, there is some truth to that notion, and these artistic works were made in opposition to that idea that men could just do as they please. This dominant attitude in times like the 60s, where lustful behaviours in men were shown as casual or even idealistic traits. This is especially true regarding the early James Bond films.
Dink, say goodbye to Felix. Man talk.
Since those times, we've had art that's pushed back against those notions, and it's all been this earnest attempt to balance things out and get to the truth of the issue. Male sexuality can be both good and bad, both romantic and depraved, both glamorous and crude. It all just depends on how it manifests. And I think the very same thing can be said for female sexuality, which can also have both positive and negative effects. Which is why I have become a little concerned as to whether we haven't gone too far in the other direction with this pushback, where now we're saying that women having sex is only ever a good thing and men having sex can only ever be predatory. Or female sexuality is this beautiful, wholesome thing and male sexuality is always depraved. Perhaps we need to balance things out again. We don't want things one-sided. The movie Poor Things was a film that I adored, but one little hold-up I had with it was that it only depicted female sexuality as this good, romantic thing, and it did fail to cover the full range of the topics. It never really delved into the negative sides of sex. Just because a woman has entered herself into prostitution to spite the domineering male forces in her life and it's out of her own volition, that doesn't make prostitution a good thing. I might be missing the point, there might have been some hidden nuanced critique underneath, but the commodification of sex is not something to be celebrated. And there is this rather vacuous notion going around that just because a woman has chosen to do it out of her own free will, that makes it a good thing. And obviously I strongly disagree with that sentiment. I don't see that side of female sexuality as empowering. From where I'm sitting, sex is like this spiritual psychedelic drug. Like, it can be amazing and wonderful, but it can also destroy you if you abuse it and don't use it properly. Anyway, that's been a massive tangent, so I'm just going to circle back around to talking about movies again. Black Swan has a female masturbation scene that is there to demonstrate a sexual awakening. The film is about this fairly childish and timid woman addressing her shadow, her darker, more chaotic side, a side of her that is adult, eager, ferocious and wanting, and when the masturbation scene does occur, it comes at the perfect time to complement this character growth. Her sexuality here is a source of empowerment. Again, just got a package from Amazon, hang on. Again, her sexuality here is a source of power, but much like the Black Swan archetype itself, it can also be a destructive sort of power. Something with the potential to be dangerous, something that demands to be properly maintained and controlled by the individual. Despite what I said before, I hold no objections to male sexuality being depicted as this horrible, ghastly and wanton thing. In fact, all things considered, when it's done well, this can be one of the most fascinating things to me in cinema. Again, there is a lot of truth to it. The Lighthouse, which is a very sexual film in its own right, has a masturbation scene with Robert Pattinson. This moment serves as a culmination of numerous experiences that he's had whilst on the island. It's quite an evocative scene, one that stays with you, because it's him giving into this rampant lust that's been boiling over for the whole movie. It's lust for the female body, which he's been totally deprived of, but it's also lust for this other hidden desire that's been slowly bubbling its way to the surface. And the manner with which he goes about it, like in his posture and his physique and his facial expressions, further illustrates to us how desperate he has become. He's grown insane from this desperation, and now he's exhibiting the characteristics of a rabid animal. He's just become a complete gooner, essentially. The fact that he's resorted to this, jerking off to a fairly simplistic wooden carving of a mermaid, it screams desperation, but then again he has been isolated for all this time, and the horny side of me can relate, can empathise. It's an important moment in the film that shows us a crucial point in his psychological unraveling. It's as if he's sinking down to another level of primitive debasement, and this is all capped off by the fact that it's presented with the sensibilities of a horror scene. Something psychologically frightening is indeed occurring here, so it's only appropriate. It's a very intense scene that complements the rest of the film wonderfully. Man oh man, I like my masturbation. In the movie Her, the act is used to add to the dystopian nature of that film's world.
Its tail is around your neck, and it's so tight around your neck.
It's a ridiculous and comedic scene, but it's one that gets across not only the loneliness, but the disconnect as well. The funny thing is, Joaquin's character is communicating with someone here. He's not strictly speaking alone. Yet what this woman wants is not only insane, but it's just so far removed from what he wants, so far removed from what he needs. He is looking for something real, but the digital age makes this a hard endeavour. This scene shows us an utter failure to connect with another human being, and it's by no fault of his own.
Okay, good night.
So in that way, this is a more sympathetic look at adult male masturbation, as it's not really depicting him as sad or pathetic. I mean, he is sad, but it's a bit more sensitive to his condition. He has these very valid sexual needs. Perhaps this is what masturbation in adults represents, a failure to connect, or more so the result of failing to connect. It's frequently depicted as a cynical and depressing thing because it is, and as we drift further and further into the digital age, or the information age, or whatever you want to call it, and the more art we're given which reflects our own human misgivings with the immense isolation that occurs as a byproduct of this era, the more apt it might become to see masturbation be depicted in media because it's such an acute and poignant symbol of lonesomeness. At least in my brain, my perverse brain.
Oh man, I'd fuck her up the ass.
There is also a myriad of examples of movie scenes that possess a masturbatory quality, but only in the non-literal sense. Because what is masturbation? It is the act of fantasizing rather than doing, the act of wishing rather than achieving. It's probably one of the best examples of instant gratification because it's all reward, meagre as it may be, with none of the effort. Masturbation is essentially a drug. With this broader description, we can now look at various other movie clips and dub them as masturbation scenes simply by them echoing these sentiments. I'd describe the binge-eating scene in The Whale as masturbatory. It's depraved, it's tragic, it's a man poisoning himself for quick pleasure, killing the long term for the sake of the short term. Shame is a film about a man who has frequent sex, but it's all so empty and meaningless that he might as well just be jerking off. There's no real connection between him and the people he sleeps with, and you get the sense that his soul is slowly being sapped away. The act of over-fantasizing as well is a form of masturbation, mental masturbation, and I'd say the films of Charlie Kaufman are timeless representations of this thought pattern. His films often involve characters lamenting over these pleasurable memories that they can't go back to instead of just creating new experiences in the present. They overanalyze their life, they live in fear and worry and are never able to overcome this crippling dread, and they reside in this frozen state of bitterness as they ponder over what may have been. There is a sleazy gratification in the act of just remembering and romanticizing the past, a low-risk pleasure that you perform for yourself. Synecdoche, New York, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, I'm Thinking of Ending Things, Anomalisa, all Charlie Kaufman works, and all are ingeniously insightful cautionary tales that every human on Earth should watch and study. However, it is important to remember that the aim of these works of art is to spur the audience into empathising with such sad existences. It's not all just about going, "Oh, that's awful, what a pathetic creature I'm looking at."
We open on Charlie Kaufman. Fat, old, bald, repulsive.
It is easy to get lost in the act of morbidly leering at those unfortunate souls. For as much as it's important for us to learn from and avoid the mistakes made by these fictional characters, it's also important for us to see them as human beings. Human beings, man, just like me and you know, you behind the camera, I know there's someone there watching. Hello. Sorry, there are some birds absolutely chirping their fucking heads off outside. I don't have anything that makes a loud noise. Things have gotten awfully heavy in this video, so I'm going to round things off by talking about a funnier example of a masturbation scene in a TV, this one is. This is one of my favourites, it's one of the funniest examples I can think of, and it's from Extras by Ricky Gervais.
Right. Hiya.
He's got Steve Merchant in it, and he's an agent for Ricky Gervais, who is an extra, and Ricky walks in on him mid-wank in his office.
Were you masturbating?
So what?
Were you masturbating when I came in?
And this whole scene is just perfect in the comedic body language, the line delivery.
What, did we have a meeting or? I don't remember planning anything.
It's a really stupid and simple concept, but it's applied so well here. And he's wanking to a picture of a nude girl on a pen, this tiny picture.
If it's anyone's fault, it's yours for leaving your erotic material lying around. If you leave that stuff about, I'm only going to do one thing, aren't I? So
it's not just that it's, oh, haha, funny middle-aged man having a wank. It's that you can tell it's probably the highlight of his day. He's just such a sad loser, and Stephen Merchant, to his credit, he depicts it so well. That guy is so talented. I think Stephen Merchant's funnier than Ricky Gervais, honestly. It's just the perfect delivery, the perfect tones in his voice.
don't tell anyone.
I'm not telling anyone. Why did you lock the door?
Well, I should have locked the door, but I didn't think ahead. The moment took me and I just went, crazy.
And all of those awkward silences in between that Ricky and Stephen are kind of the masters of after doing The Office. The masters of awkward cringe. Stephen's mate comes in, he's like, oh, can I have my pen back? Oh, were you having a wank, were you? Oh, yeah, like it's normal.
Were you having a wank?
I was trying to have a quick one, yes, but it's like bloody Piccadilly Circus in here.
I didn't know.
And later Ricky catches him doing the same thing.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
It's made even more funnier when you watch the outtakes, because Ricky Gervais just can't hold in laughter.
Were you having a wank? Were you having a wank? Oh. Were you masturbating?
Those gag reels are arguably the funniest things that Ricky Gervais has ever put out in his career.
Having a wank?
You having a wank? I used to quote that all the time to my friends who, when they just call me, I'd just be like, "You right, mate, are you having a wank? You having a wank?" You always freak them out and be like, "What the fuck are you talking about?" No, I'm not having a wank.
You having a wank?
What does that say, you little fucking shit? What the fuck does that say? I hope you've enjoyed all of this talk of wanking in this video. I honestly think this is one of the best YouTube videos to ever be created. At the very least, one of the best film analysis videos ever made. Like, it's way better than anything Nerdwriter's ever done. Nerdwriter, Every Frame Painting, all those guys, hacks. You guys should be supremely grateful that I envisioned this video idea and manifested it into existence. It's just such a profound idea for a video. Wow. Please show this video to your grandmother. That is an order.
That is an order.
Keep a watchful eye out for the monster that is instant gratification. I've heard it's been lurking around these streets, so stay vigilant. You don't want to be caught by that guy. Or girl, because I'm not sexist. Let me know in the comments what the most depraved and disgusting thing you've ever masturbated to is. That would be an interesting point of discussion. I bid you a good day as I now depart your YouTube screen.
You having a wank? You having a wank? You having a wank?
The throat.
You having a wank? You having a wank?
You disgusting fat.
You having a wank? You having a wank?
The throat.
You having a wank? You having a wank?
You disgusting fat.
You having a wank?